The Miami courthouse stood tall against the pastel morning sky, its limestone facade gleaming in the early sunlight. At 8:45 a.m., Judge Mindy Glazer's chambers were already a hub of focused activity. She sat at her mahogany desk, reviewing the day's docket while sipping her morning coffee. 2 sugars, no cream. A routine she'd maintained throughout her years on the bench. Her clerk, Sarah, knocked softly before entering with a stack of fresh files. "Judge Glazer, we have 37 cases this morning," she announced, placing the documents carefully on the corner of the desk. "The first few are routine bond hearings, but there's quite a diverse set today." Judge Glazer nodded, adjusting her reading glasses as she glanced at the clock. Her morning ritual included these quiet moments of preparation, a practice that had served her well throughout her career. She believed that each case, no matter how routine, deserved her full attention and consideration. The courthouse's air conditioning hummed quietly as she donned her black robe, smoothing out the fabric with practiced hands. The weight of it was familiar, comforting even, like an old friend who'd accompanied her through countless decisions and moments of justice. In the mirror, she checked her appearance. Professional, approachable, ready to serve. As she made her way through the courthouse corridors, various staff members greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Your Honor," called out Jeff, the veteran bailiff who'd worked with her for over a decade. His smile was genuine, reflecting the respect she'd earned through her fair treatment of everyone who entered her courtroom. The bond court itself was a model of efficiency, with modern video conferencing equipment recently installed to streamline the process. The screens flickered to life as the technical team ran their final checks. Through the windows, Miami's vibrant cityscape stretched toward the horizon, a reminder of the diverse community she served. Taking her seat at the bench, Judge Glazer arranged her materials with precision. The morning light filtered through the high windows, casting gentle shadows across the seal of justice mounted on the wall behind her. She could hear the soft murmur of voices as the first defendants were prepared for their appearances via video link. Officer Rodriguez, handling security that morning, signaled that everything was in order. The court reporter settled into her station, fingers poised over her stenotype machine. The public defender and state attorney took their places, exchanging cordial nods despite their adversarial roles. Judge Glazer opened the first file, her mind clear and focused. Years of experience had taught her to read not just the words on the pages before her, but also the subtle nuances of each case, the circumstances, the context, the human elements that made each situation unique. The clock struck 9:00 a.m. precisely as she looked up and announced, "Good morning, everyone. This is Bond Court. We're now in session." Her voice carried the perfect balance of authority and approachability that had become her trademark. Little did she know that this ordinary Thursday would soon transform into something extraordinary. As the first cases began to appear on her screen, there was no way to anticipate the remarkable connection that was about to unfold, a moment that would remind everyone present that beneath the formality of legal proceedings beat the heart of human connection. The day's first defendant appeared on screen, and Judge Glazer began her usual protocol, unaware that in just a few moments, an unexpected reunion would transform this routine morning into something truly memorable. The first case of the day appeared on the large screen mounted on the courtroom wall. The defendant, a young man in his mid-20s wearing an orange jumpsuit, stood before a plain background at the detention center. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his expression a mixture of nervousness and resignation, a common sight in bond court. "Good morning," Judge Glazer began, her voice carrying its usual blend of authority and consideration. She glanced down at the file before her, quickly absorbing the details of the case. The charge was relatively minor, a misdemeanor that typically resulted in a fine rather than jail time. The public defender stepped forward, his weathered briefcase tucked under one arm. "Your Honor, my client has no prior record. He's a full-time student at Miami-Dade College and works part-time to support his mother." His presentation was succinct but thorough, painting a picture of a young man who had made a mistake rather than a habitual offender. Judge Glazer listened intently, her eyes moving between the file and the screen. She noticed how the young man stood straighter when his education was mentioned, a flash of pride breaking through his anxiety. These were the details she always watched for, the small tells that helped her understand the person behind the case number. The prosecutor, a sharp-suited woman with rimless glasses, offered no objection to the public defender's characterization. The state acknowledges the defendant's clean record, Your Honor. We're requesting the standard fine for this offense, along with court costs. Through the video feed, the young man shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Judge Glazer had seen this nervous dance countless times before. She knew that for many people, especially young ones, this moment represented their first real encounter with the justice system. Young man, she addressed the defendant directly, her tone measured but kind. I've reviewed your case carefully. I can see that you're working hard to build a future for yourself and your family. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. However, actions have consequences, and it's important that you understand that. The courtroom remained silent as she continued. The bailiff, Jeff, watched with familiar appreciation. He'd seen Judge Glazer handle thousands of cases, and her approach never wavered. Firm but fair, strict but human. I'm going to impose the standard fine, she announced, but I'm also going to give you some advice. She leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but not unkind. Use this experience as a learning opportunity. You have potential. Don't let moments like this define your path. Relief washed over the young man's face as he realized he would be able to return to his studies. Thank you, Your Honor, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I promise you won't see me here again. Judge Glazer nodded, allowing herself a small smile. That's exactly what I want to hear. Good luck with your studies. She signed the necessary paperwork, her pen moving efficiently across the page. As the first case concluded, Sarah, her clerk, was already preparing the next file. The morning sun had risen higher now, casting long rectangles of light across the courtroom floor. The routine of justice continued its steady pace, each case receiving the same careful consideration as the last. Little did anyone in the courtroom know that the next case would break from routine in the most unexpected and heartwarming way. As Judge Glazer reached for the new file, her decades of experience had not prepared her for the remarkable coincidence that was about to unfold. The screen flickered briefly as the next defendant appeared. Judge Glazer glanced up from her papers, preparing to begin the standard proceedings, but something made her pause. There was something about the man's face, a spark of familiarity that tugged at her memory. The defendant, Arthur Lewis, stood with dignity despite his circumstances. His salt and pepper hair and lined face spoke of years lived, yet there was something in his eyes, something that transported Judge Glazer back through decades of memories. She found herself studying his features with growing curiosity, the routine questions momentarily forgotten on her lips. Sarah, noticing the unusual pause, glanced at her judge with subtle concern. In their years working together, she had never seen Judge Glazer hesitate like this. The courtroom remained silent, the usual shuffle of papers and whispered conversations falling away as others sensed the shift in atmosphere. I'm sorry, Judge Glazer said, breaking protocol in a way she never had before. But I need to ask you something. She leaned forward slightly, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. Your face, it's so familiar to me. The professional distance that usually characterized bond court proceedings began to dissolve. Through the video feed, Mr. Lewis' expression changed from resigned preparation to mild confusion. He stood a bit straighter, his eyes focusing more intently on the judge. The bailiff shifted slightly, unsure if he needed to do anything in this unexpected situation. Judge Glazer's mind raced through memories of her childhood, through corridors of Nautilus Middle School, through faces of classmates from decades ago. The resemblance was striking, but could it really be? Miami was a big city, and the odds of such a connection seemed astronomical. The state attorney and public defender exchanged glances, their usual adversarial positions temporarily forgotten in the face of this unusual development. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine, capturing this departure from routine. "Mr. Lewis," Judge Glazer continued, her voice taking on a softer tone that still carried clearly through the courtroom. "Did you grow up here in Miami?" The question was decidedly off-script, but something about this moment demanded exploration. Lewis nodded, his own expression now showing the first signs of recognition. "Yes, Your Honor. Born and raised." His voice carried a hint of warmth that seemed to echo through time. The morning sunlight streaming through the high windows seemed to pause, as if the very moment was suspended in time. The usual sounds of the courthouse, the distant echo of voices, the hum of the air conditioning, the subtle electronic beep of the video system, all seemed to fade into the background. Judge Glazer removed her glasses completely now, a gesture that seemed to strip away years of formal judicial distance. "The middle school," she said, her voice carrying a note of growing certainty. "Nautilus Middle School in the 1970s. The change in Mr. Lewis's face was immediate and remarkable. His eyes widened with sudden recognition, and for a brief moment, the orange jumpsuit and the circumstances of their meeting seemed to fade away. In his expression, Judge Glazer saw the reflection of a young boy from her past, sitting perhaps 2 rows behind her in Miss Thompson's English class. The entire courtroom held its breath, witnessing what was clearly becoming an extraordinary moment in the otherwise routine day of bond court. No one moved, no papers shuffled, no phones buzzed. Everyone present sensed they were about to witness something remarkable. A moment where the formal walls of justice would briefly part to reveal the deep connections that bind human lives together across time. "Miss Thompson's English class," Judge Glazer said softly, the words carrying decades of memories. "3rd row, near the window." The formality of the courtroom seemed to melt away as a smile spread across her face, transforming her judicial countenance into something warmer, more personal. Mr. Lewis's eyes lit up with sudden clarity. "Judge Glazer, Mindy Glazer." His voice carried a mix of disbelief and delight. "You sat in front of me. You always had those colorful folders with pictures of." He paused, searching his memory. "Butterflies on them." The courtroom watched in fascination as these two souls, separated by time and circumstance, reconnected across the digital divide. The public defender stood quietly, his legal pad forgotten in his hands. Even the usually stoic bailiff couldn't suppress a smile at this unexpected turn of events. "Those folders," Judge Glazer chuckled, shaking her head. "My mother bought them from that little store near the school. Remember the one? Right next to the ice cream shop where everyone would go after classes." She leaned forward, decades of memories rushing back. "You used to share your chocolate chip cookies with everyone during lunch." Mr. Lewis's posture relaxed slightly, his own smile growing wider. "My grandmother's recipe. She made them fresh every Sunday." He paused, emotion flickering across his face. "She always said sharing them would make more friends than keeping them to yourself." The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype machine, capturing every word of this extraordinary exchange. Sarah, the clerk, watched with quiet amazement as her usually reserved judge transformed before her eyes, humanity shining through her judicial role. "You were always kind," Judge Glazer said, her voice carrying warmth, but maintaining the dignity of her position. "I remember when Tommy Peterson dropped all his books in the hallway, and you were the first one to help him pick them up." The memory seemed to float in the air between them, a testament to how small acts of kindness can echo through time. Through the video feed, Mr. Lewis's eyes grew misty. Life takes such unexpected turns, doesn't it? Who would have thought that after all these years? His voice trailed off, the weight of the moment evident in his tone. Judge Glazer nodded, understanding the complex emotions at play. 40 years, she said softly. 40 years since we walked those halls, and here we are." She glanced down at the papers before her, then back at the screen. Life indeed takes unexpected turns, but sometimes those turns bring us full circle. The morning sun had shifted now, casting a warm glow across the courtroom. Outside, Miami continued its busy pace, unaware of the remarkable reunion taking place within these walls. Inside, time seemed to stand still as two former classmates bridged the gap between past and present. "Your Honor," Mr. Lewis said, his voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. "I never would have imagined that little Mindy from English class would one day be sitting on that bench." His words carried respect, tinged with the familiarity of shared history. Judge Glazer smiled, her judicial demeanor softening further. "And I never imagined I'd see my cookie-sharing classmate in my courtroom." She paused, allowing the moment to breathe. "But here we are, Mr. Lewis. Here we are." The entire courtroom remained transfixed, witnesses to a moment where justice met humanity, where the past touched the present, and where two paths that had diverged decades ago suddenly, surprisingly, converged once again. The courtroom's atmosphere had transformed from its usual formal proceedings into something more intimate, yet no less dignified. As Judge Glazer and Mr. Lewis continued their unexpected reunion, memories began flowing as naturally as a gentle stream. "Do you remember Mr. Rodriguez's science class?" Mr. Lewis asked, his face brightening with the recollection. "That time when the class hamster escaped, and everyone spent the whole period looking for it." His shoulders shook slightly with silent laughter at the memory. Judge Glazer's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Behind the bookshelf. You were the one who found it." She glanced at her current courtroom staff, who were listening with rapt attention. Mr. Lewis was always observant, even back then. He noticed things others missed. The state attorney and public defender exchanged glances, their legal pads temporarily forgotten. This was no ordinary court proceeding. It was a reminder that beneath every role, every uniform, every title, beat hearts filled with shared human experiences. "And the school plays," Mr. Lewis continued, standing straighter now, pride replacing his earlier nervousness. "You were in Oklahoma, weren't you? The spring musical of '78. His voice carried the clarity of a cherished memory. "Second chorus," Judge Glazer confirmed, her judicial demeanor softening further. "And you worked on the stage crew, built that amazing windmill for the backdrop." She paused, remembering. It actually turned in the breeze from the fans. Sarah, the clerk, watched her boss with newfound appreciation. In all their years working together, she'd never seen this side of Judge Glazer. The teenager who sang in school musicals, the student who carried butterfly folders, the person behind the robe. Those were simpler times, Mr. Lewis reflected, his voice carrying a touch of wistfulness. "Remember our favorite lunch spot? Under that big banyan tree in the courtyard, where Maria Rodriguez taught everyone to play double Dutch," Judge Glazer added, nodding. "And Jerome Washington would practice his magic tricks." She looked directly at the screen, her expression both warm and thoughtful. "We had quite a community there, didn't we?" The mention of community seemed to resonate through the courtroom. The bailiff shifted slightly, thinking perhaps of his own school days. The court reporter's fingers had slowed, each keystroke capturing not just words, but moments of shared humanity. "You knew everyone's birthday," Mr. Lewis recalled suddenly. "Used to keep a little notebook with all the dates." His words carried admiration. "Even then, you cared about details, about people." Judge Glazer's expression softened further. "My mother taught me that remembering the little things about people was just as important as remembering the big things." She gestured slightly to her courtroom. "It's a lesson I've carried with me, even now." Through the video feed, Mr. Lewis nodded in understanding. The years between middle school and this moment seemed both vast and insignificant. Time had carved different paths for them, one leading to the bench, the other to this unexpected appearance. Yet their shared memories remained vibrant and unchanged. "Those years shaped us all," Judge Glazer reflected, her voice carrying both authority and warmth. "They taught us about friendship, community, and the importance of seeing the best in others." She paused, looking at the man who had once been her classmate. "Some lessons stay with us forever." The morning light continued to stream through the high windows, casting a gentle glow over this extraordinary moment. In the usually stark courtroom, Past and present had merged, creating a bridge of understanding that transcended their current circumstances. The uniqueness of the moment wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. What had started as a routine bond hearing had transformed into something that would be remembered by everyone present. The natural light streaming through the windows seemed to soften, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. "You know," Judge Glazer said, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom gained through years, "seeing you today reminds me of something important." She adjusted her position slightly, maintaining eye contact through the video feed. "Our paths may diverge, but our shared experiences connect us in ways we can't always predict." Mr. Lewis nodded, understanding flowing between them. Ms. Peters, our homeroom teacher, always said something similar. His voice grew stronger with the memory. "She told us we were all threads in the same tapestry." I never fully understood what she meant until moments like this. The court personnel watched as these two individuals, separated by circumstance but united by history, continued their extraordinary exchange. The public defender noticed how his client stood taller now, dignity returning to his bearing as childhood memories replaced present concerns. "Do you remember the school motto?" Judge Glazer asked, a gentle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Excellence through unity and perseverance." Mr. Lewis completed the phrase, his own smile matching hers. "We said it every morning during announcements." He paused, reflection crossing his features. "Funny how some things stay with you." Judge Glazer touched her gavel lightly, a gesture more contemplative than official. Those words meant something. They still do. She looked around her courtroom, including everyone in the moment. Unity doesn't mean we all take the same path. It means we understand that we're all part of the same community, no matter where life takes us. The bailiff shifted slightly, touched by the wisdom in her words. Even the most seasoned court reporters found themselves moved by this unexpected display of connection and understanding. "Judge Glazer," Mr. Lewis said, his voice carrying respect tinged with fondness, "you were always the one who brought people together. Class projects, study groups. You made sure nobody felt left out." His words carried the weight of genuine appreciation. She nodded, acknowledging the memory. "We all had our roles to play. You were the one who could make anyone laugh, even on their worst days." Her expression grew thoughtful. "Life's challenges don't diminish who we are at heart." The morning had grown warmer, and outside the courthouse, Miami continued its daily rhythm. Inside, time seemed to move at its own special pace, allowing this moment to unfold with the grace it deserved. "It's remarkable," the public defender found himself saying, breaking his usual professional silence, "how a simple recognition can remind us of our shared humanity." Judge Glazer turned slightly, acknowledging his comment with a warm nod. "That's exactly it, counselor. In this courtroom, we deal with laws and procedures, but we must never forget that at the heart of every case are human beings with their own stories, their own journeys." Through the video feed, Mr. Lewis's eyes showed understanding. The years between middle school and this moment may have carved different paths for them, but the core of who they were, the children who shared classrooms and dreams, remained unchanged. "Sometimes," Judge Glazer continued, her voice carrying both authority and compassion, "it takes a moment like this to remind us that justice works best when we remember the humanity in each other." Judge Glazer straightened in her chair, her expression shifting subtly as she prepared to return to the duties at hand. The warmth remained in her eyes, but her judicial presence reasserted itself with natural grace. She understood that even in this extraordinary moment, justice needed to be served with clear-minded professionalism. "Mr. Lewis," she began, her tone finding the perfect balance between personal connection and professional duty, "as wonderful as this reunion has been, we must address the matter that brings you here today." She lifted the case file, handling it with the same care she'd shown throughout her career. The public defender stepped forward, his own demeanor reflecting the room's unique atmosphere. "Yes, Your Honor, if I may." At Judge Glazer's nod, he proceeded to present his client's case with measured precision. Mr. Lewis stood with renewed composure, the earlier exchange having transformed his presence. Gone was the nervous energy that typically characterized defendants in bond court. In its place was a quiet dignity, as if the recognition of his humanity had restored something essential to his bearing. "The circumstances, Your Honor," the prosecutor began, her voice carrying a note of consideration that hadn't been there before, "are relatively straightforward." She outlined the case efficiently, her presentation maintaining professional standards while acknowledging the unusual dynamic in the courtroom. Judge Glazer listened intently, her attention to detail unwavering. Those watching could see how she balanced her personal knowledge of Mr. Lewis's character with her professional obligation to consider only the facts before her. It was a masterclass in judicial temperament. "I've reviewed the facts carefully," she said, her voice clear and measured. "And while our shared history brings back wonderful memories, my duty is to apply the law fairly and consistently." She looked directly at Mr. Lewis, who nodded in understanding. Sarah, the clerk, watched as her judge navigated this delicate situation with remarkable skill. The morning's events had demonstrated that compassion and justice could coexist without compromising either. "The court notes your clean record," Judge Glazer continued, reviewing the documents before her, "and the minor nature of the offense." Her words carried the weight of careful consideration rather than mere formality. Mr. Lewis maintained eye contact through the video feed, his posture reflecting respect for both the process and the person overseeing it. "I understand, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady and clear. The bailiff shifted slightly, maintaining his professional stance while witnessing this unique blend of personal history and judicial procedure. The court reporter's fingers moved steadily across her machine, recording every word of this remarkable session. "Based on all factors before me," Judge Glazer announced, her decision carrying both authority and wisdom, "I am setting bond at a reasonable amount, taking into account both the nature of the offense and your ties to the community." She paused, allowing her words to settle, which, as we've discovered today, run quite deep. A subtle smile of appreciation crossed Mr. Lewis's face, acknowledging both the fairness of the decision and the grace with which it was delivered. The public defender nodded, satisfied that justice had been served while preserving his client's dignity. "Thank you, Your Honor," Mr. Lewis said, his words carrying gratitude for more than just the legal decision. They spoke to the recognition of his humanity, the acknowledgement of their shared past, and the respect with which he'd been treated. Judge Glazer signed the necessary documents, her movements deliberate and professional. The morning sunlight continued to warm the courtroom, bearing witness to this remarkable balance of justice and compassion. By afternoon, the video of Judge Glazer's courtroom reunion had begun its journey across social media platforms. What made it extraordinary wasn't just the coincidence of two former classmates meeting in such unexpected circumstances, but the genuine humanity that shone through the formal proceedings. In the courthouse break room, Sarah sat with several other clerks, watching the clip on her phone. "Look at how she handled it," she said to her colleagues, pride evident in her voice. "Perfect balance of compassion and professionalism." The others nodded in agreement, some sharing their own observations from that memorable morning. News outlets picked up the story, drawn to its powerful message about human connection. Local reporter Maria Santos stood outside the courthouse, microphone in hand. In an age where the justice system often faces criticism for being impersonal, this morning's events reminded us that behind every robe, behind every case number, there are real human beings with shared histories and connections. Back in her chambers, Judge Glazer sat at her desk, reading through the afternoon's cases. The events of the morning had left a lasting impression, not just on her, but on everyone who witnessed them. Her phone buzzed continuously with messages from colleagues and friends who had seen the video, each touched by the genuine moment they'd witnessed. The courthouse security guards discussed it during their shift change. "Did you see how everyone in that courtroom was affected?" Officer Martinez said to his relief. "Even the most seasoned attorneys looked moved." His colleague nodded, understanding that they had witnessed something special. In the public defender's office, Mr. Lewis' attorney shared the experience with his colleagues. It changed the whole atmosphere of the courtroom, he explained. But what really struck me was how she maintained absolute fairness while acknowledging their connection. That's judicial integrity at its finest. The story's reach extended beyond the legal community. Teachers used it in classrooms to discuss the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Social workers referenced it as an example of how personal connections can survive across time and circumstance. Management consultants incorporated it into presentations about maintaining humanity in professional settings. By evening, as the courthouse quieted for the day, the impact of the morning's events continued to ripple outward. Local community leaders praised it as an example of how justice and compassion could coexist. Civil rights advocates pointed to it as a model of treating defendants with dignity. Judge Glazer's final appointment of the day was with a group of law students observing court proceedings. One raised her hand. "Your Honor, after seeing what happened this morning, I have to ask, how do you balance personal connections with professional duties?" The judge smiled, appreciating the thoughtful question. "Justice works best," she replied, "when we remember that every person who appears before us has a story, has connections, has humanity. Our job is not to ignore that humanity, but to ensure it doesn't prevent us from applying the law fairly." As the Miami sunset painted the courthouse windows in warm hues, the day's events had become more than just a viral moment. They had become a reminder that in an increasingly disconnected world, human bonds could surface in the most unexpected places, bridging gaps and reminding us of our shared journey. The story would be remembered not just for its coincidence, but for how it demonstrated that even in the most formal settings, genuine human connection could flourish without compromising professional integrity. It stood as testimony to the power of recognition, respect, and the enduring impact of treating each person with dignity, regardless of circumstance.